Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. I'm Owen Ellis, and I'm super excited to have with us Senator Todd Nash. We're really happy to have you on and really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Todd, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad to be on here today.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this discussion. You've done a lot in the ranching sector, you could say. You have your own ranch, managed ranches. You're the immediate past president of the Oregon Cattlemen Association. You just recently got elected for senator for is it District 29 in Oregon? Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Perfect. Well, congratulations on that as well. So.
Yeah, I just got sworn in Salem the other day on the 13th, and just starting to, I got committee assignments. We're going to start session officially on the 21st, and we'll get rolling on some bills.
Awesome. What's that process been like for somebody that's never been through anything like that? What was that whole election cycle? Was it super stressful? What was that all like?
Well, it was stressful, and I ran for county commissioner here in Wallowa County, which is a pretty small county, 7,400 people in far northeast Oregon. And when I ran for that position, pretty much everybody knew me up here or knew me by reputation, good or bad. And so the entirety of the campaign was $199 worth of yard signs. I went to 3 speaking engagements, and there probably wasn't more than 30 people in any one of those. But when I ran for the Senate office, it was quite a lot larger district. It was 7 whole counties, 4 partial counties, 17% of the whole state of Oregon. And so there was a lot of time in a vehicle trying to make connections with people. The campaign itself cost $136,000 to get through the primary. And fundraising in and of itself, is a real challenge. And I was really blessed to have friends and family and connections that just chipped in and helped me get across the finish line. So, it was 18 months from the time that I publicly declared to the time that I was officially elected as a senator.
Wow. Yeah, and I was going to say those counties down there are probably pretty big, like far and wide between, like towns and stuff. So it's probably a lot of just driving all over the place. Would that be accurate or?
Oh, yeah. So to go from Enterprise, where I live, down to Madras, which is the edge of the district, or some of those places in Wheeler County or Wasco County, a lot of times it'd be a 5-hour drive one way. And so, for me, and I was a county commissioner at the time, and I appreciate the county keep putting up with me during all that silliness. But I'd get up a lot of times and take care of some issues with the cattle that I have here, go into the county, go into the courthouse, take care of some county business, get in my vehicle and hit the road. And if I got home before midnight, I felt like I was cheating the system. And I did that for quite a little while. It wasn't a pace that was sustainable for long term, but I really felt like I didn't owe anybody a vote, but I owed everybody that contributed, everybody that well-wished and prayed for me, or whatever the case may be. I owed it to them to do my very best to try to win. And so we won in a 4-way race with over 50% of the vote, and it was really great to have a good win there.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome. Was it pretty? Like you said, fundraising was pretty tough. Is that just a lot of phone calls, just calling up, like cold calling people? What's that like?
It was. And so I would just go through my phone list and call people and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Really appreciate your support. I had a great campaign manager. She had set up a website, and I could send that website, with modern phones, I could send that via text and have that go out, and then people had that there, and they could put their credit card on it and do that. It made it easy, but it's really a humbling process also to ask somebody to contribute to a campaign.
Yeah, I
It's
bet.
definitely out of my comfort zone. I'd never done it before. Never had taken any campaign contributions, but it's part of the deal.
Yeah. No, and we're happy you're able to get the win. So that's awesome. What was like some of the your big like issues that you were kind of platforming on?
Well, I've lived most of my life in working in natural resources, and so that's where I base most of my expertise. But you have to become knowledgeable about a lot of different things. But certainly, natural resources, those things that impact farming and ranching. In this big rural district, I repeatedly talked about when rural America does well. Uh, it simultaneously, that's when farming and ranching does well, and tried to repeat that message over and over again. Some of those regulations that uh, were burdensome to us, and some of the taxation that has been burdensome to us, um, has really put us in a decline, and we have a lot of stressors, and they're real stressors. One of the things I talked about quite a little bit was a bill that I helped pass in the last long session, and that bill had to do with ag-related suicide. And so the pressures that come on the natural resource components of of, uh, of rural America have escalated suicide to the point that we nearly rival that of veterans, and it's 3.4 times higher than it is for the average population. And most people didn't understand that. I certainly didn't when I got into discussing that and to have that discovery. But um, we were able to get what's called an AgriStress Helpline, and that is a phone call that is really geared toward farming, ranching, fishing, timber industry, and there's people on the other end of the line that understand the stressors that you might be under.
Wow. Yeah, is that something that that phone line you're talking about, is that a nationwide thing? Is that Oregon? Like
Yeah,
what
and
state?
so we got it to where we could fund it for Oregon. There were 6 other states that had already joined in, and we're actually looking at trying to get it nationwide. But at this point, we haven't got that hurdle crossed yet. But there are efforts to make it a nationwide phone line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that seems like it'd be a very important thing. I didn't know that. Like I live here in Royal City, Washington, and it's very comparable to Enterprise, and I had no idea about those numbers. So that's a very important thing. It sounds like that uh, could get resolved. So
Yeah, and some of the things that have happened in Oregon in particular, um, we have the corporate activity tax, and so that tax is based on your gross income. And so a lot of farmers, ranchers, dairies in your case, they have tremendous amount of gross income. A lot of money passes through their hands, and what
mhm.
they actually net out of it sometimes can be very
Very
marginal,
little. Yeah.
or in the red, a lot of times. And so the capital activities tax in Oregon was based on just gross revenues. And so anytime you were over $1 million, you started to get a percentage of that taxed. And there were some carve outs for a few individual businesses, but when it came to general agriculture, there wasn't any carve out. And so it was really unfortunate what ended up happening there. Um, the inheritance tax, the estate taxes. Oregon has a fairly robust tax, if you will. When you die, and then the family's scrambling around trying to figure out how they're going to pay not only the state, but their brothers and sisters in a lot of cases, and then keep the farm and ranch running. And so there's some things like that we talked about during the campaign that I'm going to try to rectify in this session. I have bills for those things, and um, um, but recognition that the decline of rural America in general has been the decline of what is how healthy farming and ranching and all those other logging and fishing and all those other components are.
Yeah. Now, and were a lot of those you said there were carve outs. What were those, like the big corporations getting kind of tax breaks? What was that? What are those exactly?
Yeah, there was a laundry list of corporations that got breaks. Dairy, ironically, in Oregon got a tax break um, if you were in a co-op, and so some of these some of like some of these big beef outfits, if you were part of that co-op, then you got a break. But anyway, it's interesting. A lot of the times the legislators, they think they're trying to help out the little guy, and what they end up doing is just being really tough on some of the little guys, and
Yeah.
the bigger outfits, they can roll with it, and that's what some of these are doing right now. The estate tax is kind of the same way. If it's a family owned business, family owned farm or ranch, it really hammers them. If they've been savvy enough to put it into a corporation, and then no individual owns it, then there's a way to exempt that. And so um, it's interesting when you discuss that with some of the legislators, that they didn't understand what the impacts were going to be, and as bad as what the outcomes are sometimes, the intent never was to be as detrimental as some of those things were.
Yeah. I feel like that's where you could really come in and help, because you are, I don't want to say like the little guy, but you live in a small town, like you ranch on your own. You've done all that stuff, and you know a lot of other family farmers, so you can kind of shed a light in the legislature and stuff. Like, no, that's actually not how it works over there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did, and I have spent most of my life. Um, I consider myself a first generation rancher because I didn't inherit a ranch.
Hmm.
I did a lot of other things. Uh, with your grandpa-in-law there, we logged and oop,
Am I back? There you
yeah, I got a blank screen right now, so I don't know what happened there.
go.
Can
Uh-oh.
you see me?
Yeah, I can still see you
Okay.
and everything. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a little distracting because I can't see you anymore.
Huh.
um,
If you have extra, like, do you have any other tabs open or anything? You could try closing all those. I don't know.
yeah. Let me see if I can get James back in here. You have the ability to edit this out, of course.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't know what would happen there. That's interesting. So you can still hear me, but you just can't see me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Huh.
So we could try to go along here. Um, James is gonna
Yeah.
pop back in here sometime. I'm sure. I just sent him a text. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, we can wait for him, or if you feel comfortable going, whatever works. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and go then. Sure.
okay.
Yeah. So where were we?
We were talking about
Oh,
kind of the
yeah.
tags, and then
Yeah.
you brought up Grandpa Kenny.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah. So Grandpa Kenny and I, we logged, we did a number of different things to be able to kind of survive and always had our hand in the livestock industry somehow and use those other businesses to subsidize that. I worked in a sawmill for 7 years. Um, and the sawmill was great because it provided benefits, a decent wage, and it was only 40 hours a week. So you got to spend a lot of different time on the weekends, before work, after work, being able to fill in around that. When that sawmill shut down, though, it was a decision time for me, and my decision was I really wanted to be in ranching full time, and so my wife was supportive enough to allow me to do that, and walked onto a ranch as a hand, and 25 years later, through different processes and different people leaving and a need to change the way we were doing business, I ended up with ownership in the land, the livestock and equipment and all of that, and so was um, able to put together a little bit of a ranch that I have now.
Awesome. How and was that all in Wallowa County there?
It was, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
oh, yeah.
and
How
yeah.
many or what? How many head of cattle did you guys have on that ranch?
Well, kind of at the peak when I was running the most, relatively small to the numbers that you're running, but we were on about 90,000 acres of both public and private land leases, and then running anywhere from 600 to 1,200 head, and it depended on how many yearlings we were running and how many bills I needed to pay off, but it ebbed and flowed, and as I was able to acquire more leases, I'd add more cattle as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, 600 to 1,200 head of cattle will keep you plenty busy, as I'm sure you know. So, it's not.
Yeah, especially when you put them out on some of the really toughest range, and kind of sounds like I'm bragging, but really some of the toughest range in the world. Those canyons that are on the upper end of uh, the Hills Canyon breaks, you know, they're really substantial challenges to run on. Yeah, and so yeah, so we ran cattle in mostly what was called Big Sheep Canyon. It was kind of the upper breaks of Hills Canyon, and uh, and that fed into the Imnaha. The Imnaha fits into the Snake River, but really challenging country, and it took a lot of that country to run one cow, and so um, we ended up dealing with a lot of different things. I had 5 endangered species on my federal grazing permit at one time, and
Wow.
then when uh, when wolves came over from Idaho, that was a whole nother layer of challenges, and that was really between the endangered species that I was dealing with and wolves. That's what really drove me to town. I was really satisfied with being out, just being a rancher cowboy, and I don't mean to say just, but because
Yeah.
it's a great service. Um, but those are the things that drove me into town. I found myself advocating not only for myself, advocating for others. Took a leadership role with the local stock growers association, And then in 2016, there was a county commissioner that had served for 18 years. He stepped down. And when he stepped down, I got asked to run as a county commissioner here. And that is what started my political career, because I hadn't served on a school board. I hadn't done any of those public functions at all. Never really had a desire to, but here I was, kind of my back up against the wall with a lot of issues. And then, like I said, trying to represent others. And so when I got asked to run for county commissioner, it's just one of those things. You vet it with your family, you talk to some of your friends and community leaders that you respect. And there was a 3-way race there, and I ended up winning that with a fair margin. And so I served as county commissioner here for 8 years, simultaneously kind of stepping up into larger roles with Oregon Cattlemen's Association at the same time. And I think it's fairly rare that a county commissioner hold a position within a trade organization like Oregon Cattlemen's, but it ended up working really well. And I would encourage others to do the same, because you end up representing both your county and industry, and you get a bigger platform on both ends when you're doing that.
Excuse me. Yeah. And what were some of those, like the main issues that as ranchers and just small farmers that in your experience you guys face? You talked about the wolves and endangered species. Were there other, like we talked about some taxes, regulation, like what were some of those issues you had experience with?
Just having viable markets. When we had cattle go up significantly back in 2013, 14, they started to make a climb. And we really had what was some of the most robust, profitable time that I've seen in my lifetime during 2014 and early 15. And when that crashed, we went from $1,500 calves down to $800 calves in short order. And that was.
And what was the reason for that crash?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, which expert you talk to, because we still had a really low population. I mean, what's easier to talk about is why we ended up with such a robust, active market during 2014 and 15. We had the smallest cattle herd that we'd had in the United States since the 1950s, and we're in that spot again now. We saw a little increase, but you go back to the 1970s, we had 124 million cattle in the United States, and you fast forward to 2014, and we had 89 million. And I think I said 1,000 before, but so 124 million down to 89 million. And we're still producing a lot of beef with those numbers, similar amounts, but we've also increased the world's population by double. So when I graduated from high school, there was 4 billion people on the planet. We've eclipsed 8 billion. And growing. The United States, similarly, we haven't doubled in the United States during that time, but we've increased a tremendous amount. So there was still this really healthy demand. And then you had some different things that were happening with some of the global markets. During 2014 and 13, they implemented what was country natural origin. And so the meat coming into the United States had to have a label on it. That restricted some of the beef that was coming in here, some of the Canadian beef that was killed up there in Pasco. They weren't bringing in as many, or sometimes curtailing Canadian beef coming in altogether, live cattle. There were a number of different factors. Export right there in 2015, when things crashed, we were having a hard time getting container ships out. But when it crashed really hard. It hurt a lot of feeders, and it took them a long time to recover. A lot of small feeders went out of business. A lot of small producers went out of business. So we had 5.5 million head less from the year 2000 to the year 2020. And we continue to decline. And then today, we're just kind of holding our own right now. We're in a little bit of a rebuild. But obviously, the highest prices that we've ever seen for live cattle, we're recognizing right now. One of the things that I hear from producers is, yeah, it's great that we're getting these prices. Inflation from everything else around us has gone up, though. If it wasn't for the low feed prices, they'd still be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it makes sense that a lot of people go out of business when you said from 1,500 a calf to 800, like how many businesses are going to survive getting their revenue cut in half. So,
yeah.
But that's one thing that we do, like with the Grow blockchain, and we've talked a little bit about it, with just the supply chain being so fragile. And we kind of saw that like a lot in COVID, just with everything. Like our supply chain has so many steps that it's very fragile. If it breaks at any point, then, it's going to be a rough time. And so, and farmers don't have a lot of control. They're very restricted with a lot of their marketing, like you talked about. And so being able to connect farmers with consumers, so farmers have a direct market to the consumer, and the consumer knows exactly where their food is coming from. They can make healthy, educated choices, and all of that is tracked like on a blockchain. It can really benefit farmers and consumers, because right now the whole food industry is kind of broken. We see a lot of just labeling is a big kind of scam that we think about, and just people have no idea what's really going on and on the back end. So.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. Country of origin labeling is still a hotly debated topic, and I'm not sure that it's necessary. But I think in order to have a product that has a USDA label on it, and people automatically jump to that's a product of the U.S., they if it's going to have the appearance of being a U.S. product, it should have to have been raised, fed, and processed here in the United States. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I bought a prime rib this year at Safeway for Christmas, and it was really good. And it was a Canadian product, and I bought it fully knowing that it was a Canadian product. Those are our friends. Those are our allies to the north. When we go to
Yeah.
war, they go to war with us. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Being a good neighbor and friend to them. But I think we should all be proud of the product that we produce, and to me, it's encouraging to have that label. Argentine beef when I was young, and maybe it still has some aura with it, but Argentine beef was supposed to be the best beef in the world. Well, why wouldn't they want it labeled coming in the United States
Yeah.
and being proud of that? We get
Yeah.
avocados from Mexico, and we get different products from Chile. And to me, it should be a matter of national pride that they want to sell their product and stand behind it.
Yeah. And it's, like you said, it's not that we don't want to buy from other countries or support other people, but it's more we should still know where that's coming from. Just as we believe in just full transparency from the producer to the consumer. Like
Yep.
We've developed it's called Farm Tracer. So if you buy beef from us, you can scan a QR code on the steak and put in the ID number from that cow, and it'll tell you like what that cow ate during its lifetime, where it was born, where it lived, all that kind of stuff. And so it's not that we don't want people to buy like Canadian beef or it's like that's a bad thing, but just that there's transparency so you can at least know like, oh, that's where that's from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah.
When COVID hit and the marketing that we did directly, we had some market ready cattle in the feedlot, and I checked with that they were supposed to go into um, a program that it wasn't our program, but a great program we've been in for a long time called Painted Hills Natural Beef. But I asked them, I said, would you be disappointed if we didn't send them through you, because we were looking at being backlogged 2 or 3 or maybe more months to try to get them processed? And they said, oh, please, anything can get rid of will help us. And so it was kind of one of those perfect storms where, Joe Biden had just sent out a $1,200 check to everybody just for existing in the United States. There was kind of a run on toilet paper and beef in the stores, and people were
Yeah.
worried about where their next meal was going to come from for the first time in a while. And and then we had some beef that was ready right there at the end of May, 1st of June, and a lot of the small processors, they really gear up and are busy in the fall because everybody wants to finish their cattle and harvest in the fall. It's kind of a traditional time. It's also a time when wild game is getting harvested. So we contacted 4 different small um, processors, and they had capacity to process some of ours. And then my wife just got on the internet and started advertising, and it worked out really well. People got what was traditionally white tablecloth beef, that would go to a white tablecloth restaurant. They got it in their freezer, and it was a great fit to be able to do that. And since
Yeah.
then, we've had requests to keep doing it, and so my wife, she direct markets a lot of our beef now. We don't have a huge herd of cattle anymore, and so it's a good fit for us.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Do you guys you sell like half cow, full cow, or do you do individual cuts?
Yeah, it just halves and wholes. That's all that we've done. And legally, you have to buy the animal um, while it's still alive, and so that's what we do. And so people partner on a half, or they buy a whole, and they own that. We facilitate everything up to getting it delivered to whatever process facility, and then it's up to them to come pick it up and go from
Yeah.
there. And we've kept our prices pretty darn cheap compared to a lot of other lot of others that are doing that would deliver or do individual packages. But it's worked out both well for both us and the consumers that's been getting it.
Yeah. And you guys do have good beef. We got some, and my wife made French dips out of it, so it
Okay.
was good. So that's our go-to meal. So,
All right. All right.
but but no,
Yeah.
they're really good. So,
Yeah.
um, but what would you say? Because you've been ranching for you said what 25 years or something or longer.
Well, longer than that, always had my hand in it in some way. There's a picture of me when I was 4 years old, and I got my first calf. His name was Red, and he was a bummer calf, like most people start out with, but always had my hand in the cattle industry in some way, but didn't ever do it full time until, let's see, 1994 was the first year that's all I did. I just focused in on that only.
Okay. So what would you say are some of the biggest change, like differences that have happened in the cattle industry from, when you kind of started to now?
Um, I don't know that there's been a huge amount of changes. Maybe that, well, I'll take that back. The biggest change that I've seen over time is ranchers having a lot of employees, and they've had to make cuts and hard decisions over the years, and so they've cut back on employees, and so mostly it's family operated, and if they're going to boot up and do more, and it's fencing or whatever the case may be that you used to have hired individuals for, they contract that out now, and so I think that there's been a change in that.
Okay. And would you say that's just because profit margins are so much slimmer now, or?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you look back into the 1970s and you take inflation rates up to, and I did this in 2000, before we got the big inflation after COVID and after um, Bidenomics and everything that's taken place of late, which
Mm-hmm.
has been very substantial. Um, that would have taken what was a steer in the 1970s to 2000. It would have made him worth $1,900. Today, I think, and that was a 500 pounder. Today, I think, if you put that on that same inflation rule, you'd be up there way past 2000. And,
Yeah.
we're getting that for some of the yearlings, which is great. But those 500-pound ball and wiener calves, that's kind of the comparative. Um, pickups were cheap, fuel was cheap, labor was cheap. And the 1970s, there was a lot of people that struggled back in that era, but gosh, there was a lot of people working on the landscape back then too.
Yeah. Because what do you get for a 500 pounder now?
Well, you're seeing calves that are $3 and $4 in some case. So at $4, you're right at $2,000, but that takes a pretty special calf to be able to do that, and he's usually lighter than 500 pounds. But there's a lot of $3 calves out there, regardless if they're right off their mom and balling and never had a vaccination in their life or whatever the case. There's a lot of those that are selling for $1,500 and higher.
Yeah. So what do you think has to happen to kind of solve some of these issues?
Well, I'm not sure. I, I think there, um, whether we're talking about solving it or we're talking about opportunities, kind of two different things. And I do think that there are some opportunities for people that are ambitious enough, smart enough to be able to get into industries and ag and excel. You guys have sought out a way to do that amongst yourselves, even on the beef end of things and the dairy end of things. Um, Being obligated to large packers or large milk buyers, um, put yourself in a spot where um, it, you don't have control over your market anymore. And so I think the more that you can um, do that, control the price of what your feed's going to be, control the price of what your product on the other end is going to be. Um, I think that that's an opportunity. The other opportunity I think for young people is to realize that the average age of a farmer rancher is right around 60 years of age. And so the attrition that we're going to see over the next 20, 30 years is going to be pretty substantial. And so there's going to be opportunity for somebody that's never been in the business, maybe didn't inherit anything, doesn't have a family connection, to be able to make some agreements, whether they're leases or whether they're LLC partnerships, to get into business and be successful. And it's going to be a lot of work, but
Mhm.
but it's worth the endeavor. It's worth trying to do, and I would encourage young people that have an interest in doing this, some of the healthiest work in the world, to engage in it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And kind of going back to, you said, when you get stuck in these contracts with a lot of the big processing plants and that kind of thing, farmers really get handcuffs. They don't have a whole lot of options on what they can do. And so that's really where going direct to consumer, and people building out platforms, like we have a platform called the Nourish Marketplace, where farmers can post their food on there and sell direct to consumer. I think that'll be a big thing coming, especially with all the new, like, Make America Healthy Again.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on all that. But I feel like people are more conscious of what they're eating nowadays, and it's kind of, they want to, like, have a relationship with the farmers and who they're buying from, and know what kind of vaccines are used on their cows, and know what their cows are eating, like all that kind of stuff. I think is going to be a big opportunity in the next little while.
Well, I do think, yeah, I think you're exactly right. It is going to be a big opportunity, and I don't want to necessarily. Uh, I want to retract myself. Some of those big contracts with whether it's packers or milk buyers or whoever the case, um,
Hmm.
those are very much needed to move those large commodity items. But
Yeah.
how many times have you seen people looking up what is taking place on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and wondering, what their product is going to be worth next month, this month, watching that ebb and flow when those guys are back there just playing with monopoly money. A lot of times it isn't reality.
Yeah.
They're speculating on how much ground is or how much grain is in the silos, and the weather that's taking place on the other side of the world, that are growing the same product. It's if you can have some of that direct market and take some of that fear factor out of there and that reliance on whether it's a commodity or whether it's a contract, that if you don't have negotiating power in, that's a tough place to be. And you don't have to live like that. There are other ways of doing business. So
Yeah.
um, making America healthy again, you know, I look forward to what's going to come out of this new administration, and seeing what Mr. Kennedy is going to come up with. It'll be really interesting. One of my fears is that we end up putting more restrictions on farmers instead of incentivizing them to do a better practice or a perceived healthier practice. Um, I am a little bit fearful that could go the other way. I looked at some
Hmm.
legislation the other day. It's going to be introduced in Oregon, and it has to do with reporting on the amount of fertilizer that you put on. And farmers, as you know, most of them are so tight fisted, they don't want to put on an ounce more fertilizer than what can be taken up by the
Yeah.
product that they're planting. And
It's
but then
expensive.
it's expensive. But
Yeah.
somebody in their front yard that will not have any controls at all, they get a big bag of fertilizer from, whatever hardware store. They throw it out there by hand or with a little dispenser of some sort, and they wheel around their yard. They have no idea what the rate is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be and how accurate they're being. And if it looks like it's not bright enough, then they put a little more on. Um, I'm guessing that the science for that goes on golf courses and a number of things, but the emphasis always comes back to the farmer rancher, and I do worry about that. Um, will there be some incentives to do some better practices out of this administration? I don't know. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But those are my fears that
Yeah.
it could go the wrong way.
Yeah. No, it kind of goes back to what we talked about a little earlier. Like a lot of the legislation might have a good intent and then it kind of backfires a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
So it'll definitely be something to watch
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
But what are some of the things that you're really excited about getting into this new administration, getting going and everything?
Well, um, I guess I have some bills that I want to put forward. One of them has to do with wolf compensation, and so those guys that are having to deal with wolves on a regular basis, and it ebbs and flows on who gets impacted. Some of those guys that are running in timber where there's elk and different things, you're going to have a problem with wolves at some point.
Yeah.
So, wolf compensation, as is right now in Oregon, you can get paid 1-to-1 for a deputation. You can get reimbursed for some of your non-lethal activities, or you can get paid for missing livestock. The missing livestock has always been one of those things that's been controversial. The environmental groups often call us fraudulent for saying that we're missing more livestock than what we actually are. Um, and in an effort to get away from that and compensate what is in reality the real loss, we've suggested that anytime you lose a calf and it's confirmed by ODF and W that you get compensated at a rate of 7-to-1. And so that seems like a lot of money for one calf. But the reality is, if you have wolves in your cattle, you're going to have an event. It's going to disturb more than just the one that was killed. A lot of times you have some fence that was knocked down, and so you have some labor and costs there. You might have cattle that have lower conception rates. There's some lost weight when that happens because they get run around. And really, when we took a total look at this, the number was really more like 14-to-1. But at 7-to-1, there's science based on this because there was a study done over in Idaho in some of the remote areas over there where they ran cattle. They only found 1 in 8 carcasses. And so usually what happens is you just come in and you're 20 head short, 30 head short. We had a guy here a couple years ago. He was 42 head short out of 350 head. And so
Wow.
it's a significant hit. He had 4 calves confirmed out of the 42. And so it starts to reflect what the actual losses are. And so that's one of them. That's one of my big priorities. Um, I would like to be able to get the ability to pursue cougars with hound dogs again. I see a mule deer in your background. we've about
Yeah.
lost our mule deer population here, and across a lot of western United States. And we have a cougar population that, um, the minimum that ODF and W would like to see there be is about 3,000 cougars, and it's estimated that we have over 7,000 now. And so,
Wow.
with that number of cougars and each one of those consuming a deer-sized animal a week, you can extrapolate that number out, and it's huge.
Yeah.
You know, you could be 300,000 or 400,000 deer-sized animals a year being consumed by cougars. So it's it's something that I think that we need as a tool to be able to do that again. And the bill that I'm proposing is Senate Bill 769, and that bill would actually allow that to come back to a county decision. So each county could make its mind up. It would be referred to the voters, and so those metro counties that don't want anything to do with it, they could be excluded. These more rural counties and frontier counties that decided that that's something that they wanted to do, and to me, it's one of those things that could start to heal that rural-urban divide as well.
Hmm. No, and I think as well with cougars, it's like the more of them there are, the closer and closer they move into the cities and towns. Like I know my wife's family in Enterprise, they were saying that they see a lot more cougars around their house now, and that's an issue for obviously them, but their dogs, like all their livestock, everything. And so it's definitely a bigger issue than just the deer, I feel like.
It is a bigger issue, and they do get bolder and bolder. And the other thing that is healthy about pursuit of cougars is, um, it gives them a healthy respect for dogs. And so, they hear a dog barking, why they might not come anywhere close to that. If you actually tree a cougar, and then you can make a decision on whether that's a cougar you're going to take. Um, and so it can be more ethical than just pursuing a cougar and taking one, which is very difficult to do. But you get a glimpse of a cougar and you take it. You don't have time to assess, is that a nursing female? Um, is that a tom? Is this something that I should take? Is it a juvenile that I don't want to? It can be a better tool in how we manage cougars, and can actually manage them, because we can't at this point.
Hmm. And what's the other side of like their argument? I guess is just that it's cruel to the cougars. Is that what they say?
Yeah,
Or?
I think anytime that you talk about using dogs to pursue an animal like that it looks cruel. When they use dogs to pursue foxes in England, and some of those things that over time it just had the appearance of being really cruel. Um, so um, I don't want to speak for the other side, and um, know what they're trying to think on this thing. I just know what I've seen over time with predators being a little bit out of control, and seeing our mule deer population plummet. It's been a sad process to watch that happen over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to give the audience a little bit of like context of Enterprise, Oregon is up in the mountains. Like you guys are in the mountains, and so wolves, cougars, everything is right at your door.
It is, yeah. It's kind of a unique little county here. We have the largest wilderness in the state of Oregon. We have Hell's Canyon National Recreation Area, huge areas that are roadless. 4% of the land in Wallowa County, and it's a county the size of the state of Connecticut. 4% of the land base here has either been under tillage, under pavement, under roof, under any sort of development whatsoever. And so a very small footprint of this large, vast county has been that way. We have one state highway that runs up through the middle of it, and there's little county roads and little Forest Service roads that are scattered around, but it's a fairly remote place. There's a lot of places that you can go here and escape, not see very many humans for a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure I don't know how much time you'll spend in DC, but I'm sure that'll be a big change.
Yeah, DC is a big change. Most of the time, I'll be in Salem for the state legislature, but it is. I find myself a little overstimulated when I'm used to talking to 2 or 3 or 4 people a day, and you run through several dozen that specifically want to talk just to you. It's a little overstimulating for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. I got one last question for you, and I should have given you a heads up if you needed to think about it. But do you have any kind of fun, just cowboy stories that you'll never forget?
I have a lot of them. Yeah. Fun stories. The one I tend to write little poems about some of those little events, but I have one where a friend and I we were both young, and we were working on a ranch together. There were 2,600 head of yearlings and 1,200 mother cows, and we were the only 2 cowboys that were hired on the ranch. And
good luck.
Yeah, and we had a heck of a good time. But for us, getting a little bit of time to play was usually roping something. And so my friend, he said, you know what? He was on a great big old stout horse. He goes, I'm going to rope that big cow. She was a great big old Simmental cow, and I just kind of shook my head. Why would you rope the biggest thing out here if you want to have fun? But he could handle it. He had the horse to handle it. He was from Nevada, and he had a slick fork saddle. And a lot of those guys from Nevada, they just rode with the front cinch only, and no breast collar, no back cinch. And anyway, he roped this big old cow, and he's got her handled pretty well, and his horse is handling it pretty well. And I fiddle around there, and I'm trying to rope her back feet so we can get his rope off. And I finally get her back feet roped. We get her stretched out between us, and kind of 2 team roper style. And as he faced up there, his latigo broke. And it slingshotted him. Those ropes are made of nylon, and they stretch. And anyway, he shot off of his horse, and he landed right in front of the cow. And with the direction that rope was pulling down and toward the cow, he hit the ground just really hard. And his feet were still in the stirrup. He still had his dallies on his horn. And he was nose to nose with that cow. She wasn't very happy by then. And anyway, it was a fun little event there. But lots of stories of gathering cattle in the wintertime out of that steep country. There's lots of old logging stories of Grandpa Kenny and things that we used to do that were silly and threatened our lives. But anyway, it's been a great life to be able to do some of those things that I took for granted, that a lot of people don't get that opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm assuming your friend made it out all right?
He made it out all right. Yeah, he did indeed.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And I really appreciate you coming on here. Is there any last words you want to say just to the audience about anything?
Well, I think never accept the status quo. And so we are a great country, and there's been tremendous struggles and battles and heroic efforts made both by military and otherwise to keep us free. Don't take that for granted. And if there's something that you want to change it. Don't accept that this is just the way it is and it's always going to be that way. Jump in there and take control of it. And if there's a law that you don't like, we are still a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Don't say you mistrust the government. If it's really that bad, get involved, get right in the middle of it. And I really appreciate the people that are willing to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here at Grow, is really try to kind of disrupt how the food industry is nowadays, how it's kind of controlled by 10 mega corporations, and really give the power back to the farmers and back to the consumers. And so I just want to thank you one more time for coming on here. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yep, you too, Owen. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.